A subscriber asked me, why are Russians so aggressive? Can't they just live in peace? My name is Elvira. I'm a writer born in the USSR, and today we're going to break down 5 key reasons why Russia has repeatedly taken up arms throughout history. This is not a uniquely Russian trait. Many nations have followed the same patterns. But it's important to understand why this happens and why leaders make the deliberate choice to send their own people to war and take the lives of others. We'll explore how this plays out specifically in Russia, using real historical examples. In the early Middle Ages, Russia wasn't all that different from its neighbors, other Viking founded states. Back then, the economy was built on raiding. People with good swords and large boats attacked those without quality weapons or transport, and their victims could not retaliate by raiding the attackers' villages in return. In those days, concepts of morality, good and evil, applied only to one's own kin. So the only thing that could ensure peace between neighbors was the threat of blood vengeance. No vengeance, no peace and security. Initially, these raids were all about plunder. The Vikings took prisoners, selling them in the slave markets of Byzantium or forcing conquered people to pay tribute, mostly in furs and beeswax for candles. It was impossible to escape them because Russia's dense forests had no roads, and all trade relied on rivers. The Vikings built fortresses along these waterways, controlling the flow of commerce. Over time, settlements grew around these fortresses as they offered protection for trade fairs. These towns became wealthier, attracting religious institutions and housing well armed soldiers. Eventually, they evolved into small principalities. After the Mongol invasion, these fragmented states merged into what became the Grand Duchy of Moscow. This process was very similar to what happened in ancient China, where warring states battled endlessly before eventually uniting into a single political and economic system, because that was the only way to survive. But this was not a peaceful unification. In the medieval world, land and the peasants working it was the most valuable resource. However, due to Russia's harsh climate and poor soil, its feudal lords needed significantly more land to match the wealth of their French or English counterparts. And where could they get that land? By taking it from their neighbors. So, when Moscow's rulers spoke of gathering Russian lands under one hand, it wasn't about national unity. It was about expanding wealth and power of the Grand Prince. Why did Moscow succeed over other cities? Because its rulers aligned themselves with the Mongol Khans and secured the right to collect tribute on their behalf, giving them a steady flow of money. And in any era, whoever controls the cash flow gains power. With money, Moscow could buy weapons, build fortresses, and maintain an army. This allowed them to repel enemy raids while launching successful ones of their own, steadily expanding their territory. Russian rulers quickly realized that their personal wealth and influence depended on foreign trade. So they began launching military expeditions eastward to Siberia and later to Central Asia to see what resources could be exploited. The indigenous people of Siberia could not resist Russian expansion because they lacked firearms and had a devastating weakness for alcohol. Just like in North America, where European settlers overran indigenous lands, Russia's conquest of Siberia followed the same brutal pattern. It's just that no Hollywood westerns were made about it, so it's largely forgotten. The Russians either struck deals with local elites, subjugating and intoxicating them, or crushed any resistance. Colonists and soldiers followed, steadily pushing Russia's borders all the way to the Pacific. Russia also fought hard to eliminate competitors in the resource game. In the late 19th century, for example, Britain and Russia fiercely competed for control over Central Asia. This region was crucial to Russia because it supplied cotton, the backbone of its early industrial textile industry. The second reason for aggression is the suppression of political opponents. This has taken different forms throughout history. First, stopping raids on Russian border settlements. The southwestern regions of the Russian Empire were vast open steppes, difficult to defend but really attractive for settlement. Russian and Ukrainian steppes have rich black soil, similar to the Great Plains of North America, making them far more fertile than the land in central Russia. For centuries, peasants sought to settle there, but local nomadic tribes frequently raided these settlements. Again, much like in America, bands of horsemen would appear out of nowhere, attack, plunder, and disappear into the endless steppe. There was no way to track them down. The solution was a brutal one: extermination, forced assimilation, and complete political domination of the local tribes. Second, fighting wars to support key allies. A prime example is World War I. Russia didn't enter the war out of a strong desire to fight Germany and Austria Hungary. Instead, it did so because of its military alliance with Britain and France. Abandoning allies in their time of need wasn't an option, especially since they provided Russia with major loans and were vital trade partners. Russia hoped that Germany would be intimidated into surrendering, but as has happened many times in history, Russia overestimated its own strength. The war ultimately broke the empire's back, paving the way for the Bolsheviks to seize power. Third, Russian rebellions. The Russian Empire was a vast collection of different ethnic groups, many of whom were forcibly incorporated, though Russian history textbooks conveniently left that part out. Officially, the narrative was that all border nations, from Finland to a large portion of Chinese territory, joined Russia voluntarily. But rewriting history does not change reality. Take Poland, for example. It spent years under Russian rule and made multiple attempts to regain independence. Russia's response was forced Russification, banning Polish language education and allowing only those loyal to the Tsar to advance in their careers. The Poles resisted, but their uprisings always ended the same way. Their leaders were executed or exiled to Siberia. This was very similar to how Britain treated Ireland. Fourth, defending against invasion. World War II provides a classic example of this. For the Soviet Union, it was a war of revenge. Once the Nazi invasion was repelled and the Red Army pushed into German territory, they showed no mercy, believing they had the right to take revenge for their devastated homeland. Fifth, destroying the enemy's resource base. One of the most brutal examples is the Russian invasion of Finland in 1714. For the Finns, this period was as devastating as World War II for the Russia. They call it the Great Wrath. At the time, Finland was under Swedish rule, and during the Great Northern War, Peter the Great's army invaded. To ensure Sweden could not reclaim the territory, the Russians employed a scorched earth strategy. The war was not even against the Finns themselves. Yet they were massacred. Their land was ravaged, and many were sent to forced labor camps to build what would become St. Petersburg. Russia's chronic poverty was not just due to harsh climates and poor soil. A nation's wealth is built on trade, and for centuries Russia struggled with it, primarily because it had no direct access to the sea. This created major financial problems. The vast majority of Russia's peasants live in a subsistence economy, meaning they had no money. Taxes were collected in grain, cloth, and other goods, which then had to be sold or traded somehow. By the late 17th century, Russia had only one major seaport, Arkhangelsk, located in the far northwest, far from the country's main production and agricultural centers. The Tsar desperately needed money, but Russia had no known silver reserves at the time. Meanwhile, demand for Russian furs, timber, iron, textiles, hemp used for rope making, and other raw materials was enormous. British and Dutch were rapidly expanding their naval fleets, and Russian exports could have played a crucial role in that. To trade profitably with Western Europe, Russia needed ports on the Baltic and Black Seas. That's why, throughout the entire 18th century, Russia fought to break free from its geographic curse. And it succeeded. The entire northern coastline of the Black Sea, including Crimea, was conquered, allowing Russia to trade through the Mediterranean. After the fall of Byzantium, Russia saw itself as the last stronghold of true Christianity and the protector of Orthodox people. This belief fueled numerous wars in the Balkans and the dream of expelling the Turks from Constantinople, now Istanbul, restoring it as a center of the Orthodox faith and conveniently seizing control of the Turkish straits leading to the Mediterranean. Tsar Nicholas II hoped to make this dream a reality during World War I. Even today, some Russian religious figures claim that Istanbul should belong to Russia. The city was never Russian, but since Russia considers itself the heir to the great Byzantine Empire, some believe it should inherit its ancient Orthodox capital. In the 19th century, Russian Tsars adopted another messianic role. While revolutions erupted across Western Europe, Russia established one of the most rigid police states in the world. The monarchy then positioned itself not only as the guardian of the true Orthodox faith, but also as the last bastion of stability and traditional values. Order was seen as a continuation of divine law, something to be preserved, not changed. Innovation was treated as chaos, a destructive force both physically and spiritually. The only exception was military technology. Tsar Nicholas I crushed free thought and suppressed creative expression, but at the same time, he funded Russia's first railroads and the construction of steam powered warships. Military advancement? Acceptable. Social progress? Absolutely not. But Russia's most radical messianic idea came later, the vision of a global revolution. Today, many forget that the Bolsheviks weren't originally focused on building socialism in Russia. In fact, they believed socialism in Russia was impossible because 80% of the population were peasants, and peasants inherently desired private ownership of land and tools. To build socialism, you needed industrial workers, people without land, property, or savings. At the time, such workers existed mainly in Western Europe and North America. The Bolsheviks saw World War I as the end of the capitalist world, not in a biblical sense, but as the beginning of a global socialist revolution. When that revolution didn't materialize, they did everything possible to destabilize the international order, funding labor movements and nationalist uprisings across the globe, especially in Britain, Germany, and China. They failed in Britain. They partially succeeded in Germany, but only after World War II. And in China, the Soviet Union played a direct role in turning it communist. By the way, I'm currently translating my novel on this very topic, titled The White Ghost's Empire. The book will be ready in a few days, so be sure to subscribe to my blog at elvirabari.com to get notification when it's released. It's an absolutely fascinating story based on true events. And here's the kicker. Russia's messianic ambitions have not gone away. The latest attempt was leading a coalition of global South nations to challenge the West. But now that Donald Trump has reconciled with Putin, the question remains, if the supposed ultimate enemy is now a friend, who exactly is Russia supposed to fight against? Russia has a deeply ingrained tradition of absolute monarchy. When one person holds immense power and controls vast resources, their personal ambitions, preferences, dreams, and fears shape national policy. Time and again, Russian rulers have launched wars simply because they wanted to. Some sought glory, others aimed to expand their influence, and some waged wars out of personal grudges. In some cases, wars even started by mistake. The war in Ukraine is a prime example. This is Putin's war, driven purely by his personal desire to subjugate Ukraine. He had tried multiple times to bring the country under his control and failed. So he turned to brute force, first by occupying Crimea, then Donbass, and later launching a full scale invasion of eastern Ukraine. Can Russia live in peace with its neighbors? Yes, it can, but only if the conditions make aggression unprofitable or impossible. That doesn't mean crushing Russia because realistically, no single country or even a coalition has the resources to conquer it. Many have tried, but in the end, it was never military defeat that stopped them. It was resource depletion. The right diplomatic approach is not collective punishment or medieval style group responsibility. Of course, no one wants to spend time sorting out who in Russia is guilty and who isn't. There is no energy or patience for that. But we must work with the reality in front of us. Russia today is an absolute monarchy, and broad sanctions on all Russians only strengthen this monarchy because millions of people are now trapped with no way out. Absolute monarchy in Russia exists because, for the average person, there is only one reliable path to wealth and success: cooperating with the system. The monarch has seized all of Russia's natural wealth and treats it as his personal property. Worse still, he spends it on his own whims, like a war that serves only him and a tiny fraction of nationalist fanatics. The rest are just trying to survive and make a living in the system they are stuck in. For a deeper dive into why the Russians support Putin's war, check out my other video. The link is in the description. All surveys show the same thing. More than anything, Russians just want peace. They want to be left alone, not dragged into war, not forced into absurd political games, just allowed to live their lives. When asked about the best moment in recent foreign relations, most Russians pointed to the 2018 FIFA World Cup. The country was flooded with foreign visitors. Cities were full of joy and celebration, and for a brief moment, there was a real sense of connection with the rest of the world. That is what normalcy looks like for Russians. A smart foreign policy toward Russia would focus on diversifying political engagement. Right now, everything goes through one man because he is the only one world leaders talk to, the only one invited to global events. That needs to change. Other Russian figures, politicians, thinkers, cultural leaders, need to be given platforms, opportunities, and recognition. The more perspectives included in international discussions, the less Russia remains a one man show. Another key strategy is helping promising Russians build international careers. It's also crucial to reject collective blame. If one Russian athlete, Svetlana, gets caught doping, there should be an immediate counter message. Not all Russian athletes cheat. Look at Elena. She plays fair, and we support her. This cuts off Putin's ability to exploit Russophobia as a propaganda tool to rally people around the flag. And here's an even bigger challenge: figuring out how to make Russia's wealth distribution fairer. Right now, 1% of Russians control 56% of the country's total wealth. But in reality, Putin can strip anyone of their fortune and hand out unimaginable riches as he pleases. That's the core of his power. But this system is not a law of physics. It's just a social construct. Contrary to stereotypes, Russia's business and intellectual elite aren't mindless followers bowing before its Tsar. These are strong, intelligent, and ambitious people. They just have no real way to change the system because the West has shut them out. And inside Russia, they have no one to turn to. If we want peace with our neighbors, we should think about how to turn them into allies. If we want endless military spending, we should isolate Russia, turn it into a pressure cooker, and wait for the next explosion. To make the right decisions about Russia, we need to study it and understand the context. And if we want to see each other as real people instead of stereotypes, we need to read literature. Fiction helps us understand one another in ways no political analysis ever can. For all the deep thinkers and lovers of epic Russian novels, check out my book Russian Treasures on Amazon. And if you are already read it, please leave a review. Reviews are incredibly important on Amazon. Also, if you'd like to support my channel, hit the Buy Me Coffee or Join button. Every time someone does, it makes my day. Thanks for watching. See you next time.